Hello, this is Andrew from UberCrit. It's been a while. We're back, sort of, maybe, who knows. I'm with Mo and Alice from Rock Nest Games. How are you two today?
Doing good.
Good, good, thank you.
How are you
My
doing?
favorite, I'm good. See, my favorite part of recording is every time you have to pretend like we didn't already do those things. It's fine. So Rock Nest Games, Chroma Arcana. I'm super excited for it. I'm a big card game guy. Used to be a semi-professional Hearthstone player. Huge into tabletop. Super excited to talk to you guys. Um, Before we get into the game specifically, I would love to know, how did Rock Nest start? What gave you guys the inspiration to make your own game to begin with?
Okay, so I've been doing game design since I was 7, um, and obviously not at a professional level. 7-year-old me wasn't never really dreamed this would be what happens. Um, I was a software developer, and I think it got to a point during the pandemic where I started making this game, Chroma Arcana, and I realized that this is actually kind of fun, and this could be a thing to introduce to the public. And I just sort of went from being a software developer, slowly did part-time game design, and then one day I realized I could do this full time. And so we made the company Rocknest Games, and that's where we are now.
Yeah, so last year we sort of took the plunge and made the decision for Mo to actually quit his day job and set up a company and go full time into this.
Congrats. That's the goal for everyone in a creative endeavor. So I wish you nothing but the best. Did you know when you first set out that you wanted to, like, this is your company, you're going to be making games? How did you know that you wanted to do a card game first, rather? Because the board game space is so big and vast. Like, how did you know that you're like, all right, card game, that's where I want to focus my first game to be?
So card games have got quite quick iterations. When playtesting card games, making changes to a card game is pretty simple. All you have to do is print a new card, try out a new thing, try out a new mechanic. For a first-time game designer, I think the ability to make changes quickly is important, and to make changes cheaply is important. So another game that I'm designing is a skirmish game, more like a war game, where lots of the changes that would be required mean that I have to make changes to the board, to make changes to the way the characters work, and I have to make changes to the way that the overall feel is. So starting with a card game means that we can have quick iterations fast and not have to worry too much about, I guess, worrying about every aspect every time we make a change, because we can make small changes.
It also has the benefit of being a lot easier to produce for a first game than some other larger games. Um, Partially because the component cost tends to be a bit lower and more simple, because you don't have to mess around with lots of unusual components. Also, the shipping can be a little bit easier because the boxes can stand to be a little bit smaller and easier to send out. So logistically, it's a lot easier as well. Um, Also, I guess passion. We both used to be big card game players, Magic the Gathering especially. So yeah, it's just something that felt quite natural for us.
I was actually, you kind of read my mind. I was going to ask if you guys have any history in card games. As I mentioned, I actually don't know if this was on the recording or not. I play a ton of Hearthstone. I'm
Mm.
currently really big into Lorcana, the new Disney card game. I think they're excellent games. Um, Magic, you guys said, how long have you guys been playing? You guys still play casually, or you guys still do that? Just out of curiosity.
Not
Um,
for a while.
yeah,
Not for a
not for a
while.
while. I have been tempted to get out the old cards and play again, but one of the things they don't tell you about being a game designer is that as soon as you start designing games, you have less time to play games. So we haven't really been spending a lot of time playing card games recently. But just before we started making Chroma Arcana, we were really into Legend of the Five Rings, and
Okay,
we were playing a lot of Keyforge. Keyforge is one of my all-time favorite card games.
for sure.
Um, yeah.
I haven't played Keyforge, but I've heard really good things. So
Hmm.
I love the idea that card game players make card games. I feel like it's important for you to not only be knowledgeable of the space, but have like a passion for it. I think you can really tell when someone is making something that they're not super into. And to follow up on before, I agree. I've out here in Southern California, there's this big board game convention called Orcon. It's under Strategicon, and sometimes it's crazy how big these board games are. I think you guys are making smart decisions. Chroma Arcana specifically. I'm sure you have heard this a lot, and you will continue to hear this a lot, but the thing that drew me in initially was the artwork. It is a absolutely stunning game. Um, how did you decide on this particular art style? And moreover, how have you curated like the artists that you've wanted to work with for this style? Because I imagine you're not just having one poor artist draw 300 cards,
Mm.
or paint in this particular case. So please tell me about that.
So we have 4 artists at the moment. So yeah, not just the one. We actually have 3 artists that are working on the base game. And then one of them is returning with a fresh artist for the expansion, which is coming out at the same time. Um, and I guess, how do we decide on the watercolor style? We played a lot of Magic, which we've talked about before. And one of the problems that we found with Magic was that the artworks, if you look at the artwork for Magic cards separately to the cards, they are these magnificent pieces and they look really stunning and they look really gorgeous. But when you squash them down onto the cards, they're tiny and you can't really see all of the fascinating details that are involved. So one of the things that we did with Chroma Arcana was that we had these full card art pieces that we wanted, and watercolor was quite a simple way of creating these art pieces. And it meant that creating small test pieces wasn't very expensive. Go on.
Plus, so the reason why watercolor in particular is the direction we went with is because the first iteration, with the first iterations of the game, there was actually more color theory involved. So, for example, there would be cards using red watercolor paint and cards using blue watercolor paint, and then there would be cards using purple watercolor paint that had a lot of synergy with the two of them. It was kind of like a blend of the two. So we felt that watercolor helped portray that because it was almost like you had the color splashing around. Like we always said, we wanted it. We didn't want clean, like like very specific artwork. We wanted it to look quite choppy. We wanted it almost to be like you have mages on the battlefield throwing paint around and like quickly sketching out their spells. The game has since sort of evolved a little bit away from that, but it just always felt like the right style.
Totally. It's gorgeous, and it's always like a soft spot for me when you can put a game's artistic design even nominally into the actual design of the gameplay loop. And so I much respect. Speaking of the gameplay loop, one of the most important and fundamental things in a card game in general is the way that mana works. And you guys have come up with a system that I don't believe I've seen before, having using resources to charge your cards. How did that design process happen? And rather than just, like in, for example, in Magic, you have to use lands, and there's specific cards, and I think it's a not a bad system, but it could be seen as boring. I think the way that you guys designed it purposefully makes more of a interesting gameplay loop, and so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So Alice and I went to the very first. I know exactly when I thought of this. Alice and I went to a tournament for Magic the Gathering, and it was I had built. It was a draft,
Pre-release.
a pre-release draft set. Yeah. So I built a deck that was pretty good, and I had a very good. I mean, I can't really say that. That was a bit boasty. Pretty good. It was pretty good. I had a good balance of all my colors. I had a good balance of lands, and every single game that tournament, I was either mana starved or I had just a handful of land. every time I took a mulligan, it was just the same thing. And so, like, by the third or fourth turn, all I was either doing was waiting for a land to be drawn, or I was just playing a land, not playing a card. And I realized this is probably an inherent issue that doesn't really come up very often, because you'll remember the negative parts of a game than you'll remember the positive. But I realized that wouldn't it just be really cool if I could take one of my blue cards and charge up a blue spell with it instead of using a land, and like throw the resource away instead of being able to cast it later, and then be able to cast a spell without having to worry about having a perfect land amount in my hand at the beginning. So that's sort of where it came from. We were also playing a lot of Keyforge at the time, and one of the features that Keyforge has is that you choose a guild, a school. I can't remember what the terminology in Keyforge is. You choose, your deck consists of 3 factions, and you choose one of those factions, and you can play all of those faction cards in your hand. And so, like, you're sort of set to saying, I want to play this faction, and you play it. And then the next turn you say, I want to play this faction, and play it. And so that way of charging spells up by using the same color is sort of me saying, okay, this turn I kind of want to play blue spells, so I'm going to start using my one blue spell, and I'm going to start using my other blue spells in my hand to charge up those blue spells. And it just sort of clicked, and it all fit together, and it was really interesting. And we also have an additional way of charging spells, which is maybe a bit nitty-gritty to talk about, but every turn, every spell in your spell book that hasn't been cast gets charged by 1 step. So you can also go, you know what, I don't really want to cast any spells this turn. I'm going to plan for next turn. I'm going to put a couple of spells down that I know are threatening. And then next turn, they'll automatically start charging up, and then my opponent will see what's coming. And that was a really interesting gameplay loop that came about from that.
Yeah. Like, I think one of the downsides to having to use land in Magic to play is that often the choice of what you play is almost made for you by what land you have in your opening hand. And then from there, there's usually a correct choice, a statistically correct choice of how to play, which kind of means that you're beholden to your opening hand. And we just thought it would be a bit more interesting if you had a bit more choice. Why be beholden? Like, why should your opening move depend on what land you happen to draw and then what cards you top deck, when you could actually like pick and choose from a lot more options, kind of introducing a bit more strategy.
Totally. I love the idea that the game is built as a card game, but with like board game sensibilities. And I really feel like that is kind of driven home by that. And another thing I noticed when I was reading up on it, how when you run out of cards, rather than you're just out of resources, you shuffle back in, kind of like a deck builder almost. It will cost you a life. And that's also probably getting into the nitty gritty because you haven't explained how the game works. But I love how like these little mechanics will make it easier for players to actually enjoy the game. Because that's one of the biggest things with regular card games. It's just like, oh, well, you can't really do anything this turn, sorry. Or, oh, I guess you're just out of cards, you lose. So I love that there are these give and takes with your guys' game. I guess speaking of, do you want to explain, like, do you have like an elevator pitch version of how to play the game, or just an overall explanation of the game you wanted to say?
Um, we haven't
If
really
not,
rehearsed.
oh, that's fair.
Well,
Yeah.
well, we have a 2-minute how to play the game video on YouTube.
Perfect. I
Which
could
is,
just insert that right here if you like, instead of you guys going through it here.
Chroma Arcana. Each turn has 4 steps. The first is the focus step. Choose a spell in your spellbook. Add as many charge tokens to it as you have active spells. Your active spells do their focus actions. Crafted Horror does 2 damage. Remove a sand token from your active minion. That ends the focus step. The second is the prepare step. Place spells in your spellbook from your hand. Discard cards to charge spells in your spellbook. Now, Barrier and Obliterate are ready to cast. That ends the prepare step. The third is the cast magic step. You must cast all fully charged spells. Barrier first. Remove all charge tokens from it and place it in your active area. Obliterate next. Remove all charge tokens from it. Your rival takes 3 damage. That ends the cast magic step. The last is the refresh step. Discard your hand down to a maximum of 2 cards. Draw back up to 6 cards. If you cannot, sacrifice 1 health, shuffle your discard pile, and continue drawing. That ends the refresh step.
Yeah, it's 4 videos of 30 seconds each that just go through all the turns. It's slightly outdated, but it's still pretty fun.
Okay, well, that they just heard it. They're all, 27 people who are going to see this or fucking they're in. No, I'm just playing.
So you're aware, it's going to be more than 27 people because
We're going to share it
we're going to
around
be
to
sharing
everyone
this.
we know.
Oh, perfect.
It'll be 28 or 29 people.
We finally made it, the both of us.
This might be seen by our 3,000 subscribers, which is going to be interesting.
Fun. I'm so glad. Hello, Rocknest subscribers. In various articles I saw, there have been iterations of the game where you only had 7 colors / tribes at one point. Now I saw you guys are up to 8.
Yeah.
With it being kind of customizable with how you put into the game. Was that a intentional design process to make things a bit simpler? How did you end up on the amount of colors that you ended up at?
So we had 3 colors to begin with. We had blue, red, and purple. And Alice said earlier how you sort of mixed 2 colors together to make purple spells. So you could always use blue or red spells to charge up purple spells because that's the sort of color theory mixing. Then we added orange and green, which was the branch outwards for red and blue. So blue spells could charge green spells, and green spells could charge blue spells, but green spells couldn't charge purple spells, and vice versa. And so it sort of like branched out. And then we made up 2 new colors, gold and black, which were the gold could charge everything because gold was a mage paying money to do stuff, and black was the absence of all colors, so it could only be charged by itself. And so that it spiraled out like that, and then we reined it back into 4, and we made these 4, which were red, blue, green, and orange. And we removed the synergies where the orange was connected to red by some way, and we separated that so it was a bit cleaner. And then we went back up to 8 from there. So we sort of went from 3 to 5 to 7 to 4 to 8. And one of those colors, 8, is a little bit nitty gritty again. Harmony, which is the mix of all of the other colors. So it's sort of like the multicolor color.
Got it.
It's the dual color color.
Love that though. Is there, in your estimation, obviously you said there's an expansion coming with the launch of the game, and if it does well overall, I imagine there are plans to expand on it further. Is the idea of adding in more colors eventually into the game, is that something you've considered at some point or something you'd be open to?
So I think that's something that we will be open to. I know Mo has a few ideas that he desperately wanted to get into this version, but we didn't want to be overly ambitious, so we've decided we'll rein it back and then maybe see about releasing more in the future. But our general idea is we don't really want to keep putting loads of different cards or sets into the market. We don't want it to turn into a TCG style thing where you have to keep buying more. We want to keep it pretty enclosed to like you buy 1 box and you have everything with it. Even the expansion, it's not actually like more colors or anything like that. It's just a multiplayer and solo sort of co-op expansion. Because we sort of figured that a lot of people who would want to play this will be into their dueling card games. So this is just a 2-player game. But we also want to make it accessible for people who want to do like 6-player games or solo games. So the expansion is purely just kind of a different cooperative game mode to allow for that. But it's quite important to us to keep the cost down in general for everybody. So the only reason that's a separate expansion is that we wouldn't want the people who only want to play 2-player to have to pay basically a little bit more for a game mode that they're not going to end up using.
That's honestly totally reasonable to me. I was just curious what the design process was. I suppose they're in the thought behind it. Um, you've stated in articles that representation matters, and this is why that you've have so many different egos in the game for different representations. For me, you put a bunch of rats in, which I feel very represented. Thank you. Um, what was I think it's a great choice to be made, but what made you do that? Because I feel like that's something that a lot of people maybe don't even consider when making something like this. And it goes a long way, I think, to make this is a long way of saying representation matters, and I think it's a great thing that you guys are doing, but what made you guys do it in the first place?
Representation does matter. I am a Palestinian British person. I play a lot of games that are sort of desert themed, or like they've got Middle Eastern influence, like the Dune games, for example, that have a lot of white characters represented in the imagery. And so I don't really feel incredibly represented by these characters that have a Middle Eastern background. And I thought it was that was one of the reasons why we thought that we sort of realized that, hey, we could add some more representation to our game. It's set in a Middle Eastern sort of setting. It's set in the desert kingdom of Arad Hell, and having a bunch of just non-different characters, everyone looking more or less the atypical board game character, felt a bit disingenuous. So adding a lot of representation was important to us so that we could sort of show the diverse cast of characters. But also because as a consumer of board game products, I don't feel very as a consumer of board game products, I don't feel very represented very often. So I know that there's going to be a lot of people out there who will feel the same way. Magic the Gathering introducing the Lord of the Rings set and changing the ethnic backgrounds of a lot of characters was really interesting and probably very positive, because it lets people who want to play Magic sort of hold up a card and go, oh, cool, I feel related to this card. I kind of like this concept.
So representation is something that just feels quite normal for us anyway. We do a lot of work in our sort of personal and professional lives with representation. Like I used to organize, so I work in the tech industry. I've not quit my day job yet, like Mo has. And I do a lot of work there organizing sort of talks on diversity in tech. And we live in London, which is a very diverse place. So for us, it was just quite bizarre that there isn't that amount of representation in the board game industry anyway. So that's something that we sort of want to help to change.
Got it. I love that. I love that as a proud Southern California guy. You know, it speaks to my inherent values. I very much appreciate it. Before I let you guys go, I know that you guys have a Kickstarter that is supposed to be starting next month. Do you guys have an idea of like what can you share about it? I feel like I can't really ask specific questions about it because there's nothing really out there yet. Do you have an idea of like what backers might get, what the price points might be, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so we want to keep it quite simple. So we don't want to have like loads of loads of different like pledge tiers with like loads of different bits of content and like loads of stretch goals. We're going to keep it quite simple with the base game and the multiplayer expansion. We want to have a few stretch goals, but based more on the actual quality of the components. So the more, when you manufacture board games, the more copies you manufacture, the cheaper it is. So basically, once we get the cost down per item, we want to put that money back in to the product. So just making the cards a little bit thicker cardstock potentially, or just having a slightly nicer box. We will be having, or we hope to have, some art pledges. So there will be some, I think maybe 5 or 4 pledges where you actually get a piece of the artwork. So one of the artists that we're working with, he's going to be sending us the actual original pieces. So there's going to be a chance to get basically the only physical copy of the original artwork.
That's stunning. I love that. Do we have, I apologize if this has been announced. Do we have a price point for the game that has been publicly announced as of yet?
We have a semi-public price point set. We are looking at about $35 for the base game, and the expansion's going to be $15. That's subject to change because the way that the world works, prices could change next week. But that is us keeping the prices as low down as we can to give you your most bang for your buck as well, which is really important. One of the primary steps of one of the primary things that we have been focused on is making sure that this game is affordable. So it's about 35 for the base game, 15 for the expansion, and there might be some extras in there for upper tiers depending on how many people are interested.
Yeah, like we're thinking of doing an add-on for neoprene playmats, just because I think that's something that every sort of card game player gets quite excited about.
Yes, I agree. Well, thank you both so much for doing this. Please check out Chroma Arcana. I think it's going to be a great game, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you.